I know this is so long overdue, but in all honesty, I just didn't know how to make this video. Not only did this movie leave me speechless, but it ended with such a cliffhanger that it made it so difficult for me to make this review. But nonetheless, we are finally here. I'm gonna try and keep this review as short as possible since I'm kind of late to the party, so we're gonna do a quick critique, if you will. I'm not even gonna go into spoilers since there's not many to go into really, but if you haven't seen this movie, I highly suggest you do so as soon as possible. It's a phenomenal cinematic experience and by far my favorite film of the year so far. This film definitely took a little bit to get going though, but once it did, it absolutely did. The opening of this movie is amazing, and about halfway into the film, it just becomes one of the greatest things I've watched in a theater like ever. For starters, I mean, do I really need to talk about it? The animation. The animation in this film somehow is a step up from the first, which I didn't think was really possible yet. They managed. Every shot in here is art, literally. The frame rate changes, the design choices, color palettes. For example, every time there was a scene in Gwen's universe, I was screaming without the S. And they still keep those small details that make rewatching it so enjoyable. Like that one scene from the first film where Miles throws a bagel and it hits someone. If that was me, I would have been so angry if that bagel hit me. Anyways, my jaw was on the floor for most of the film, and it wasn't just because of this. The conversations alone between characters was so impactful. When Miles was talking to his mother on the rooftop, it got me choked up, and this happened throughout the film multiple times. Speaking of characters, this movie did exactly what the first film did and greatly accomplished, giving us new characters to fall in love with alongside Miles, and they for sure did that. Gwen is even better in this film, having a wonderful arc that was extremely touching with some serious allegories and themes that I greatly appreciated. Spider-Punk was a crowd favorite, and for great reason. They really took advantage of both his aesthetic and character in the best way possible. They used his characterization not only as a running joke, but also it led to some very critical moments within the story. I also loved Pravita Prabhakar. His design is gorgeous, and he brought a nice amount of levity to the film that blended really well amongst the rest of the characters. I thoroughly enjoyed Miguel O'Hara, although he was a bit of a menace in this film. His character in particular really allows you to feel the stakes within this film, and it was just done really well. Peter B. Parker also comes back here, as you guys know, and he was also good for the most part, but I'll get into that a bit later. But overall, every character in here was well utilized, at least to me they were. The movie kept itself very focused as well, which was really great to see because there are cameos in here, it being a multiverse movie, but they weren't as abundant and as huge as I thought they would be, and I very much enjoyed exactly how they were used. The soundtrack in here is great, just like the first film, although I will say I do prefer the soundtrack in the actual film from the first. I much prefer the score from this over the first. There are moments where Daniel Pemberton's score just elevates a scene so much and it gets heavy. I got chills just from the music alone so many times, especially in the back half of the film. I'm literally listening to it as I'm writing this review. The film as a whole deals with some great themes, and it takes what worked from the first film and just elevates that with themes of tragedy and loss used to explore how this version of Miles thinks and carries himself much differently in comparison to the rest of these spider people, which leads me to one of my few criticisms about the film. The main conflict of this film stems from Miles making a specific decision that goes against kind of every other spider person, And it was just really, really difficult for me to believe that some of these characters would go against Miles. Also, there's a character that does something for Miles that is widely important to how the film concludes, and it felt kind of out of left field. Like, why did you do that? It doesn't bring the film down a whole lot, but it was just something constantly running through my head during the film. Also, the ending, while not a bad one, in fact, it was making my heart race. Like, it ends open-ended, not a sequel setup, but like it ended actually open. Like, it clearly feels like the story has another half to it, which we obviously know, but I'm stating this without context, and that's what ultimately made this film so difficult for me to review. A common question I've been asked since I've seen this movie twice now is, Keezy, do you like it more than the first film? And I respond the same way every time, and that response is simply, I don't know. While Into the Spider-Verse obviously has a more satisfying ending and feels conclusive with its story that it's trying to tell, I prefer many elements in Across the Spider-Verse over it. The score, the action, the animation, the script. We're only halfway into this story, which makes it so incredibly hard to gauge. My gut feeling is that with its minor pacing issues in the first half and moments that felt forced for the plot to move forward, or moments that didn't feel in character, this was still a movie that blew me away from the first second to the last. Across the Spider-Verse breaks boundaries once again, not only in animation but film itself. Those who only see animation as a genre and not a medium simply lack something, because this movie was literally better than any movie I have seen this year, both visually and narratively. I mean, everything, even down to the voice acting, everything is phenomenal. Across the Spider-Verse is one of the best experiences I've ever had watching any film, and I'm itching to see how this story concludes. And for all these reasons, I'm going to give Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse a more than well-deserved 98%. And obviously this might change depending on how Beyond the Spider-Verse is, but bye-bye.